This is a special episode of Farm Talk sponsored by PetRx.com, an online pet pharmacy. PetRx.com is located in Westlake Village, California, near the Wildlife Crossing. PetRx.com, delivered right to your door with care. In this episode of Farm Talk, we're talking about the Animal Crossing over Highway 101. Hi friends, it's Paul Ward and welcome to Farm Talk. The Santa Monica Mountains are the largest urban national park in the United States and actually the world. And with that, animals have to coexist with millions of cars. And of course, if there are accidents, the animals pretty much lose every time. And so folks are trying to find a solution to this problem. Who better to discuss that than Beth Pratt, the California Regional Director of the National Wildlife Federation. Beth, welcome to Farm Talk.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Great day.
Absolutely. And I must add that you're also BFF to P-22.
Yeah, or former BFF. But still, even in his passing, yeah, I feel like we're still connected.
Yeah. And for folks that don't know, P-22 was a mountain lion.
P-22 was this, incredibly beloved and worldwide famous mountain lion that lived in L.A. Like I'm talking in L.A. under the Hollywood sign. And he sadly passed away in the end of 2022. But he's kind of like a Jim Morrison or Marilyn Monroe. Like even in his death, he's still very much with people. So yeah, he lives on in the true Hollywood style.
Right, awesome. You noticed, and other folks as well, that animal deaths is just kind of staggering. I read recently that it's 1 million animals a day are killed by cars in the United States, billions a year. Globally. And so we have this urban metropolis, Los Angeles, which is just, sprawl for hundreds of miles. Mm-hmm. And, interesting that we also have the largest national park right next door, which people don't realize that the Santa Monica Mountains is a national park.
Right.
And so with that, you have, animals coexisting or forced to coexist with people, and they try to cross the road and splat. They're dead. And with Highway 101, it's kind of the Great Wall of China. The animals can't get across.
Exactly.
And so you and others spearheaded this project to build an animal crossing.
It's to me, there's so much to this project that's wondrous, but also I think, myth busting in some respects too. I mean, first of all, people think of L.A. and they just think of concrete and smog, and L.A. has an incredible amount of open space that I don't think people realize. Now, I mean, the Santa Monica Mountains, which run right into the middle of LA, right? Griffith Park,
right,
are just incredible. Sometimes I'm on trails, I think I'm in a Yosemite. But what happens is that is overlaid with, I'd say, the only myth that is true about LA, which is the traffic and the freeways. I mean, it's almost become this fun. The 405, the 101,
right.
And the Saturday Night Live skit, right? You can run them down.
Right.
So you have this great wildlife habitat that, people like the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy spent decades ensuring was here. And you have a lot of wildlife. We have mountain lions, bobcats, coyotes, you can just go down the list. But the problem is you have these formidable freeways, some of the busiest freeways in the world, like the 101, the 405, and the 5, intersecting that habitat. And as you said, when the cars and animals meet, the car is going to win every time.
Right.
So it was actually P-22, the mountain lion that we opened with, that introduced me to kind of what was happening. When I first started with the National Wildlife Federation in 2011, I was working more in traditional conservation. My background's been more in Yellowstone and Yosemite. I've worked in these remote areas, national parks my whole career. And when P-22 came on the scene in 2012, this mountain lion pops up in the middle of L.A. I didn't even believe it at first. It was a headline. I'm like, there is no way that's true. But I met with the National Park Service biologist, Jeff Sickich. I'd maybe, even after 20 years in California, been to L.A. maybe a half a dozen times. I'd never been to Griffith Park at this point. And he meets me in Griffith Park, and he's telling me about what all these mountain lions were going through, not just P-22, how these freeways were not just defining their habitat, but putting them at risk of extinction because it's not just them getting killed by the cars,
right?
But it is these freeways are genetically isolating them so that their only options for breeding is with their own family. So they're inbreeding themselves out of existence because they cannot. Right. Their home territories are defined by these freeways. So it And then that led to the solution. It was actually that very day when I met with Jeff Sikich, the National Park Service biologist. He's telling me about not just P-22 being trapped by these freeways, but this whole population that literally they didn't think was going to make it. And I remember thinking, well, how can I help?
Right.
And naive me, Jeff was like, well, there's this little crossing we've been trying to get built. I'm like, sure, how hard can it be?
All right.
Not knowing it'd be 13 years of my life and counting and $100 million plus. But yeah, for me, it was just a moral imperative. Like, we knew how to solve it. How could I, on my watch, let these mountain lions go extinct if there's a solution?
Right. So you and Jeff and others got together and then determined that the best solution for the cats, but not just mountain lions, but other animals as well, was to build a crossing of significant size. It's not just a little, footbridge for pedestrians, in a strategic location, right? That would connect the Santa Monica Mountains to another open space area.
Yeah. So, this has so many, the history of this goes back to, I think, actually the late 80s, where you have the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy. And I love it's right here in Agoura Hills, where this literally one of the most significant conservation projects of our time was born. The Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, of course, was preserving open space for decades. And Paul Edelman and Joe Edmondson at the time, this is in the late 80s, before corridors and connectivity were really in kind of the common scientific thought. Back then when I was coming up in conservation and getting my education, the dominant view was still, okay, you put aside a Yosemite or a refuge here or a park here, check, preserved it for wildlife. We now know scientifically, not true, and that's what I love about science. When we get more evidence, we change our mind. We now know that connectivity is important. You just can't have a landscape, an island. But back then, that wasn't as prevalent. And you had visionaries like Paul Edelman and Joe Edmondson saying, there's just something intuitive. And this is borne out in letters and reports they were sending at the time about continuous space. They kind of instinctually knew that was important. And that's the only reason we're able to put this crossing now, is they were able to connect where Liberty Canyon is connecting the Santa Monica Mountains to open space to the north. You get into the Santa Susanas, you get into, all the way up to Los Padres. And it's the last 1,600 feet in the entire area that has that connected space on both sides. So I love that, even instinctively years ago, that they kind of knew something would be done. But I'd say the most recent, sort of this recent push started, I'd say, in the late 2000s, like 2008, 2009. The Park Service had started doing their research in 2002, at least on the mountain lions. They were starting to see some alarming results, such as the genetic decline. And so they started talking with the Conservancy, with Caltrans. Senator Fran Pavley, again, Fran Pavley Meadow right here at Agoura Hills. She was the first mayor of Agoura Hills and went on to become a state senator. She was one of the folks that led the early charge, at least starting to get people talking about what was possible. A tunnel was thrown out. What do we do here? And then I got involved in 2012. And yeah, we kind of behind the scenes for a couple of years did some feasibility studies, looked at what the dominant view from all the scientists was overcrossing, and it had to be in that location. And then we were off and running, and it's just been a really great collaboration. The main partners are the National Park Service, Caltrans, Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, and then my group, which was the last partner, myself and the National Wildlife Federation. But of course, it takes a village. There are so many more partners involved in this. But that was sort of the core group that has really, like, day-to-day working on this project.
And Caltrans had never done anything like this before. They were known for highways, and that's it. Maybe some surface streets, but not really helping animals.
What's interesting is none of the partners had done any of this before. The Park Service hadn't built a crossing, at least in California. Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy hadn't built a crossing. National Wildlife Federation hadn't built a crossing. Caltrans hadn't built a crossing. But what was really wonderful, and we had the dream team of these visionary folks who have, all of them have been with this project for 13 years now. But yeah, at first, Caltrans, was like, well, we'll build it, but we don't have a budget. Their hang up wasn't that we can't do it, but that there's no budgets for this stuff. Park Service was like, we need to do this. Conservancy was like, same, we're a land agency, we don't do crossings. So, but what's been wonderful is, yeah, definitely back then, although everybody was kind of willing to explore this, certainly I think there were a lot of more, well, this is crazy. Even my own organization was like, this will never happen. The project manager, Sheikh, who's been on it now since 2016, I think, he told us around groundbreaking, we didn't know this at the time. He was the 5th project manager we got. And he told us at groundbreaking that he was actually told when it was handed off to him, don't worry, just humor him. This is never going to happen.
Wow.
So we joke about that. So there definitely was some, if not skepticism, just like, hey, this isn't going to happen. And why would you, we had to counter a lot of why would you put it in an urban area because of that myth that there's no wildlife here. But yeah, none of us had done it. And that's why we brought in a lot of outside help, consulted with experts like who'd built the BAMP crossings. And indeed, we did this a little differently in that we actually fundraised more money to bring in experts to work side by side with Caltrans. Nobody does it better than Caltrans in building a bridge and doing our roads. They're the largest transportation agency in the country, if not the world. But they had never done the biological overlay.
This is a mammoth project. I mean, this isn't just some, 2-lane road with a dirt floor for the animals to cross. I mean, this is like a whole habitat.
Yeah, what I find interesting is we picked, and I've toured crossing sites all over the U.S., we picked the hardest place to put a crossing in the country, easily. One of the biggest freeways and busiest freeways in the country. You only have one place to put it. You can't pick like the best place to engineer it. There's only 1,600 feet right there where you can put it because there's development. And it's massive. Listen, we get asked a lot, why is it so big? I would happily have built the smallest wildlife crossing in the world, but we had to go over the 101 and the access road. Agoura Road is right there. And we're putting a full-fledged habitat on top. So you need to handle a soil load, which is actually, I didn't know this going into this. It surprised me, but I guess it makes sense now. I thought, if you're not having cars on it, you need less of a structure. You need more because of water and soil, because we're putting vegetation on top. You have to make it wider because the animals will not feel safe. We have to mitigate for sound and light. And if you just put a narrow bridge across, you might get an animal here and there using it. For the most part, they're going to know they're still on the freeway. So this came with so many design considerations to actually erase the freeway from the animals, both sound and, vision, all those things. So it's massive. It's 210 feet long by, this is just the structure over the 101. We're not even talking the access road, by 175 wide.
Wow.
And you can see it now. You can see how.
Wow. And animals will, some animals will make it their home. Right?
Yeah, that was the other thing. We use P-22 in the mountain lions as kind of the poster cat for this because everybody loves cats, right? And they were most at risk and still are of extinction. Because of their territory needs, they have enormous territories. They need to be able to navigate these freeways because they're inbreeding themselves out of existence. This 101 is like the Great Wall of China or the border wall. It's almost impenetrable. And so mountain lions south of the 101 are literally the only breeding options they have are with their family members. Really, imagine you're on Tinder and you're swiping, and all you get is your father, your daughter and your great granddaughter.
Not going there.
Yeah, not going there. And that's what the National Park Service research is showing is literally they are getting to the point where they will be sterile. Birth defects showed up in 2020, not a good sign. But having said that, this freeway impacts all wildlife from monarch butterflies to wren tits to western fence lizards to you name almost any animal in the Santa Monica Mountains is impacted by this. So the habitat is being designed for all wildlife. So you may be driving under and you may have a mountain lion crossing over you during your commute, but you might have a fox family on top raising its young or a monarch butterfly alighting on some native milkweed. So for me, it's really hopeful in that it's not just about getting animals from point A to point B. It is reconnecting the entire Santa Monica Mountains ecosystem for both flora and fauna, for all wildlife. And that's a little different than most crossings. Most crossings just are designed for big animals, get them across the road, you throw some gravel and on top and you're good. Nothing wrong with that. Right. But we had a bigger problem. We actually don't get as much roadkill as you'd think there. It's more that it's such a big barrier, the animals don't even attempt. And just to show you, it impacts all wildlife, even animals you might not think, birds, right? And even butterflies. I know during butterfly migration season, I feel like I'm a mass murderer, right? But birds also, you see dead birds all the time on these roadways.
Right.
We just put the girders up, right? So you now have a bridge platform. But what that also did was now block out the light in that area for the first time in 70 years? I don't even know.
Right.
And some students in Dr. Travis Longcore actually studies light pollution, how it impacts wildlife. They were out there measuring light levels one night, and they saw a barn owl, and they saw him fly across the freeway right over the new platform. Because to him, the lack of light meant safety.
Interesting.
So it's already working. And for an animal you might not even expect, a barn owl.
Wow, that's really fascinating. So you said this has been going on 13 years, kind of in the making from kind of its inception to today.
I date back to the idea of something here, decades.
Right.
But I would say they started talking about, again, something more seriously. I'd say like 2009, 2008, when the Park Service, some of the early results of the Park Service research was coming back. And then it got serious. When I came on board, they had just applied for a federal tiger grant to actually look at feasibility of doing a tunnel, right? That was an early idea, which was ruled out pretty quickly. And so and I'd say, this current serious push was about, 2010, 2011. And then I came on board in 2012.
Was it mostly private funding that just kind of took off, and then they kind of, got the government grants kind of as it progressed?
It was both. So that was my job. You had these entities who were pretty much talking about this behind closed doors, because that's what you do. You got to figure out if it can work.
Right.
But when we started seeing, how big it was going to be, early on, we're like, we're going to have to go for some private funding here. We need the private community because it was so visionary and different. This is a landmark crossings. Nobody, it's not that wildlife crossings are nothing new, but nobody's ever done one like this before. Again, in this urban area, this large scale, it was just different in so many ways. So the National Wildlife Federation, my group, when I came on board, we're the only ones that can fundraise and advocate. The other agencies cannot, right? The Park Service is a public. So that was my job then, to take the science and their need and figure out how to implement it. And my assessment and, the group's assessment early on is we're going to have to go private here. Because for a few reasons. One, it is so different. And, public are not as good at risk-taking, right? Two, the urgency. These mountain lions were out of time, game over. The National Park Service research was showing if we don't do something.
And how many mountain lions were there estimated to be in the Santa Monica Mountains versus kind of north? If they could get north, they could have a bigger pool to breed with.
Well, it's just sort of an exchange program. Where the mountain lions should be, both in the Santa Monica Mountains and beyond, they are. The mountain lions are extremely self-regulating. They do not share territory, so they live alone. They have enormous territories, 100 and 150 square miles.
Wow, each cat?
Yes, it's huge, enormous territory.
Wow.
So it's not that there wasn't mountain lions where they should be. And I always like to stress that this is not about bringing more mountain lions. It's just about that mountain lions from the south can leave and mountain lions from the north can come in, and you've had this genetic exchange, right?
Right.
So they estimate in the greater Santa Monica Mountains area, just because of the math, since we know they don't share territory, probably anywhere between 10 and 12 to maybe 15, and kind of like Ventura all the way up to, even going into the Simi Hills and then all the way to Griffith Park. So It's not a huge population.
Right.
But the crossing itself will help facilitate that genetic exchange. It's to me, but it's also like we talked about, going to help with all wildlife. So,
and it has a specific name, the Wallis Annenberg Wildlife Corridor.
Wallis Annenberg Wildlife Crossing. And when getting back to the funding question, the reasons we knew we needed to at least go partly private. A, it was visionary, it was big. Two, the time frame, as we talked about, these mountain lions were on their way out. If we didn't do this now, they probably weren't going to be here.
Right.
And three, the other thing we didn't want to do was take away transportation dollars, right? We don't want to take away money from bridge repair and road repair, right? And that, early on, we're like, that the optics on that aren't great. So we really started with a big private push, and that was my job as the only entity that could fundraise and advocate and do the public outreach, although we all worked together on that. And we had, I think, a few pivotal moments here, both on the private and public side. Early on was, yes, this caught the attention of some pretty big visionary folks. Leonardo DiCaprio, which was one of our first donors, was just believed in this project. Mm-hmm. And Wallis Annenberg, in 2015, she donated the first private $1 million donation, and we were kind of off and running. And then on the public side, we had, again, an agency that was really early on. This is still when we were being told we were crazy by most people. Mm-hmm. I have a special place in my heart for those people now, yeah, I guess we were crazy. But the State Coastal Conservancy put up the $1 million for our environmental documents, and then we were off and running. So we had some really great early private investors on the public side. I'm pretty sure it was from the Prop 117 Habitat Conservation Fund from the State Coastal Conservancy. So then we were able to do, there's steps in the process, the environmental permitting and 30% design with those two donations. And then at that point, Caltrans could do their work in designing, but then we had to, start raising funds for construction and all that. And that's where Wallis Annenberg, she just did not donate, write a check. Her and Cindy Kennard and the whole team at the Annenberg Foundation were with us every step of the way. And as we proceeded, we turned that $1 million that they donated into $10 million.
Wow.
And
with
then,
the matching funds?
Yeah, exactly, matching and showing. And then, of course, Wallis said, we're going to give the lead donation, which was $25 million. We wouldn't have a crossing without her, and that's why it is named for the Annenberg Foundation.
Wonderful.
Yeah. But then I will say on the public side, we then had, I can't thank Governor Gavin Newsom enough and Wade Crowfoot and others, but, I was privileged enough with some of the project partners to give Governor Newsom a private tour. This is, I think, about 2018. His dad was instrumental in mountain lion protection here. So for him, this is a legacy project. And we gave him a tour of the crossing, no press. It was just, myself, some of the partners. And after that, he's like, whatever help you need, we're going to get this done. And he has been instrumental on the state side. So it's actually turned out to be almost a 50-50 split with, again, state funds. But these are funds that have to be spent on conservation for the most part, right? So like bond measures that are voted for the environment, and then the private community stepping up at the half. So to me, this is such a great example of a public-private partnership where both sides said, we got to do this. How do we make it work? And meeting each other halfway.
That's awesome. Now, do you see this as a model for the future? I mean, it's not the only place in California or the United States or the world that needs animal crossings. I mean, and there are other animal crossings in the world.
Yeah.
But this is certainly probably the biggest in the United States.
Yeah, it's the biggest in the world from at least what we're being told. I hope somebody knocks this off. I would love for it to be. But yeah, wildlife crossings are nothing new. But I think what P-22 and this crossing did was opens people's eyes. I mean, a lot of these crossings are in rural areas. You just never see them. And I think it showed people, P-22 really, his story, this cat who made this miraculous journey. He grew up right here in the central Santa Monica Mountains. We know that from genetic testing. Mm-hmm. He had to find a new home when he came of age. If a mountain lion, when they're about 1 or 2, which is equivalent to kind of our teenage years, again, they don't share territory, so they have to go find a new home. And if you're in the middle of the, greater L.A. metropolitan area, that ain't easy. Right? So he did what he had to do. He just kept walking. Most of the males in this area get hit by cars or do not make it to the age of 2. He made a journey that most others die doing, which is he crossed both the 405 and the 101. Roads that I am terrified driving on most of the time. And here's this cat who walked it on foot. And as somebody who has retraced that likely journey, God, almost 24 times now, I don't know how I make it. Never mind.
It's kind of like winning the lottery. I mean,
yes, he won the lottery.
It's almost impossible. You think about it, and if you're local, you know how crazy that is.
Yeah.
Right? If you're not, I mean, just have to look.
Yeah, you're walking. See, he had to walk through Beverly Hills and Mulholland Drive. I mean, it's insane, right? He had to, cross these freeways that are just 10-lane traffic. I mean, I've stood on both those freeways at 2 a.m., which is when mountain lions are active. I still wouldn't run across for $1 million. I mean, they just don't slow down much. So yeah, he makes this miraculous journey, and then he's kind of trapped in Griffith Park, for 10 years. I think he made a very reasoned mountain lion decision that I'm not going to cross those freeways again. Griffith Park, no other mountain lion, lots of deer. Okay, bachelorhood ain't so bad. I'm staying put. But that put a real human story to this mountain lion that I think people related to more than a scientific paper, which is here they were watching it real time, him trapped and trying to make it in L.A., which for I think a lot of us, we can identify how challenging it is to have a dating life in L.A., especially with the 405 divide, right?
Right.
So, I think his world fame and showing the impact of these freeways on him day to day, right? You'd have reports of what he had to go through.
Because there were cameras set up and his followers,
and then you have
website.
Cameras everywhere. He'd pop up now and then, like when he took a nap in a crawl space and so you had this, what I, have termed the Brad Pitt of mountain lions, sort of his story playing out in real time that showed people what this cat had to go through to survive in an urban landscape and what we needed to do, which was connect space. It's not that he shouldn't have been in Griffith Park, but he should have been able to come and go safely.
Right.
And so that, along with just the utter audacity of us to think we could build a crossing in the busiest freeway in the world, I think elevated the cause of crossings in a way that they are now part of the public consciousness. People love them. They're bipartisan. Doesn't matter if you're red state, blue state. People widely support them. Now they're just being talked about, which is what I love that P-22 and the Wallis Annenberg did was just put them in the public consciousness in a way they hadn't been before. And now you're just seeing this wave of more crossings. You're seeing like Governor Newsom, and not this budget year, but the last two, $150 million towards more crossings in California. Wow. So we're looking at more in California.
Maybe the Bay Area, other urban areas.
There is no shortage. There's in the Bay Area, you have, there's this newt crossing I'm looking at where thousands of newts are killed every year. You have just even in Southern California on the 15 down near San Diego, same mountain lion situation playing out. You have crossings on 395 for mule deer. Listen, there is a list that we could knock out, no shortage of projects. But also across the country, I love that, California is typically an influencer, right? And there's no different here. We've seen, because I think it's that, hey, if L.A. can do that ambitious thing, then we can. You're seeing state budgets putting money. You're seeing states like New Jersey passing connectivity plans, New Mexico, you name it. So I think it really elevated crossings in a way that, for me, is the best outcome of this project, that it's not a one-off. We're going to do more.
Right. It's kind of the beginning of a movement, and
exactly.
And other people took notice, and now it's
moving. That, to me, is the best outcome of this project.
Now, you mentioned with the science that this was the only spot that it would work.
Yep.
Right? Connecting the bigger Santa Monica Park to the northern region, but then you also had to get local public support, and we're kind of we're sitting in a horse barn right now, and people here are, love the outdoors.
Yep.
But you also had to get political support locally. Yeah. So it kind of all had to come together.
It all had to come together, and I can't thank Agoura Hills enough. Agoura Hills, I consider it my second home. It's an incredible community. For those who don't know where Agoura Hills is in California, you probably know where Calabasas is because the Kardashians is from there. That's the next town over. But yeah, Agoura Hills and all the surrounding communities have been supported since the beginning. That's what was so interesting about this project, right? I've been working in conservation for, my whole life, really. So we're talking 35 years now, maybe a little less. But, usually it's a fight, okay? But there was no bad guy here, right? The land was protected. There was no one to fight there. Caltrans was like, we'll do it. We just need the money, which, wasn't easy, but that's an easier problem to solve, just, writing checks.
Right.
And yeah, the city and all the surrounding cities since the beginning have been ultra supportive. I knew that we're not going to have a problem when we had our first public rally in 2014. We did a lot of work behind the scenes for about a year and a half. And then we launched the Save the L.A. Cougars campaign in 2014. And that's when we sort of made our big first public announcement about we were looking at this and we needed support. I think we were going after a government grant at that point. And we put out a release about a community meeting and a public rally. And we figured we'd get like 20 to 50 people. It was 9 a.m. Nobody likes to drive in rush hour. 450 people show up.
Wow.
Those crews every year. The mayor of Agoura Hills, for school kids with posters, Agoura Hills residents. I think, you had with posters saying, we want the crossing. My favorite poster was protect the local Cougars for guys like me. I still love that poster. And we were just off. The city of Agoura Hills and all the surrounding cities, Thousand Oaks, Malibu, you name it, all passed resolutions early on supporting this. So I can't thank, especially the city of Agoura Hills, who has just been with us every step of the way. They're such a great partner, both the leaders and the residents who have just stepped up and said yes. I mean, I'm tearing up, right?
Right.
We want these mountain lions to have a future. We want wildlife to have a future on this landscape. And Agoura Hills, you're doing this visionary conservation project of our lifetime. And so
We see people coming out to like watch the animals cross. I mean, I kind of envision like Noah's Ark. They're like, they'll just like come out and watch the animals cross. And I don't know.
I don't know if it'll quite be like that. I will tell you before I answer that people come out and watch the construction. Oh my God, is every step of the way, people will post and they are emotional, like, oh, the bridge is up. So it is fun to see people get emotional. So crossings are not quite going to be like Noah's Ark, where I think if you are going to come out and wait for animals to cross,
You get bored.
you might get bored. I mean, a mountain lion might cross, I don't even know. I mean, it's not like the animals just queue up we are going to have some observation. The crossing itself, people won't be allowed on, but we're going to have both a high educational platform and talk about another amazing donor. Frank and Joanne Randall donated a sizable amount, and they will have 2 educational platforms named for them. One on both sides. One will be a lower one, a little more accessible. The other will be kind of a hike up where you can look down on the crossing. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure at some point people will see, deer or something go over.
Right.
But yeah, these crossings, even, all the ones I've toured, it's not like you're having this parade of animals. They'll come in kind of cycles.
Sure. Sure. Or seasonal, or the monarch butterfly.
Yeah, exactly. Seasonal, or, deer, they'll pass through, but not every day. So yeah, it'll be interesting. We are actually taking bets on what animal will cross first. Now, nobody had barn owl on their bingo card, so
Right.
This barn owl already used it, but we are taking bets on, once it's completed, what's the first animal, two criteria. What's the first animal to actually cross it? And then what's the first animal to use it? I mean, that could be like a fence lizard or something, but What is the first animal to cross it? My money's probably on a coyote. They're pretty bold and
Right.
and extroverted, so...
You'll have a crossing cam, right?
Oh, there'll be
24.
I'll tell you, this site, the Park Service has been monitoring with cameras for decades now. We have cameras now that construction's going on, and yeah, there is a whole monitoring plan the Park Service put together post-construction. So we're not going to do it real time because, we don't want people running to the crossing, but we will be sharing all of the footage from animals using it. It's going to be quite exciting.
I understand that you have volunteers that are going to be helping folks kind of learn about the crossing and the habitat that's going to be created.
Yeah, the volunteers have been so key to this effort since the beginning. We've had volunteers that have been with us literally since we started. A couple people that come to mind, Agoura residents like George Coleman. He was in since the beginning. Sherry Ferber, who lives literally right in Liberty Canyon. But, as this crossing started getting constructed, we were getting calls for tours all the time. Even before something was built, people wanted to see the site. They wanted to learn more. So the National Wildlife Federation, we needed to assemble a docent program. And so one of the partners we work with in our work, the Agoura Conservancy, we funded and charged to manage that for us, just to get us started. This was a couple of years ago, and they did an incredible job. But we are to the point now where literally we are now taking that back because the demand is so big. We're actually hiring a person to manage that program. The tours, we're doing not even just the docent tours, but we're doing, sometimes 5 tours a week. Oh, and then the docent, and those are like more for engineering, we'll call us up, or elected officials. Mm-hmm. And then the docent weekend tours are filling up. So, yeah, we actually are right now hiring for somebody to lead it, and the National Wildlife Federation will be kind of taking that back in-house. The Agoura Conservancy, though, a great partner who, they're real, docents really wasn't their main focus, so they're a nonprofit. They do coexistence. In fact, we're doing a coexistence workshop at King Gillette Ranch on June 29th. But yeah, the docent, they are such a dedicated group. Like there's, volunteers of every ilk for this project. So we have some that do events like P-22 Day. But the docents is a real commitment. You have to go through a pretty intensive training. You have to graduate. You have to stay up on the latest information. And we just have such a great core group of docent folks who are out there in the heat, sometimes the rain, doing tours. And the interest has been so high. I mean, these tours just keep filling up. And this thing isn't even built yet. Right. Can you imagine? And I think that leads to the next part that, we're thinking about now. This is going to be complete sometime in 2026. I mean, we're just getting started. I mean, we do, the news is already, you see this in the news every week. Yep. I probably do 5 media interviews at least a week.
Wow.
Think about when it's finished. So we are starting to think about the long-term interpretation and education. I think the docent tours are only going to increase. What are the interpretations? We're about to put an exhibit up in the Agoura Hills library so people can come learn about it. But yeah, we're just getting started, I think, with the outreach. It's pretty exciting to think about.
That's incredible. And for folks that want to learn more just generally, or maybe they're local and they're excited and maybe they want to be a docent,
we love it.
Is there a website? Is it Facebook and Instagram?
Oh, yeah, there's so many ways you can connect. There's 2 main websites. There's SaveLACougars.org, and then there's 101wildlifecrossing.org. We manage both. One is kind of focused more on the education and fun and fundraising. That's SaveLACougars.org. And then 101wildlifecrossing.org is the partner site. We have FAQs, and it's really focused just on like the crossing and things like that. So either of those websites, you can follow me on Facebook. I post a lot about it, Beth Pratt 1 or P-22 on Facebook or Instagram. And then obviously, any of the Caltrans sites, if you're interested, obviously, in like traffic information or stuff like that. But yeah, we'd love it. I mean, there's so many ways to get involved. Donate, volunteer, spread the word, help with coexistence. No shortage of ways to get involved.
Well, Beth Pratt with the National Wildlife Federation, thank you so much for being our guest on
Farm Talk. Thanks for having me. It was a really fun day to talk to you.
Absolutely. And of course, be sure to tune in next time for the next edition of Farm Talk. This episode of Farm Talk was sponsored by PetRx.com. PetRx.com, delivered right to your door with care.